Today I'm turning this into a finished card. This is just an old yogurt container that lives on my desk. It's where I keep all of my leftover cardstock scraps. They're roughly sorted in rainbow order, and today I pulled out a whole mix and spread them across my desk. The plan was simple: start with these scraps and see what kind of background I could build. This idea actually started back in March when I shared a tutorial in my card making with scraps series where I built my own patterned paper using small strips of patterned paper and cardstock leftovers. That project focused on building neat striped backgrounds, but this time I wanted to take the same idea and push it in a little bit of a different direction. Instead of clean lines, I've been working with scraps and irregular shapes to build what I can only describe as like an abstract landscape-inspired background. The inspiration for this actually came from a painting I saw by a US artist, and I'll share that here. When I looked at it, I immediately thought that this is potentially something that could almost be translated into paper scraps instead of paint. I'm applying the multi-purpose adhesive sheet to half a piece of A4 cardstock here. That way, if the experiment works, I've got enough of the original background left to turn into maybe more than one project. From here, I started layering scraps and pieces to create that loose landscape style base. And then it was just a matter of prepping my scraps. So I started cutting into these, and instead of using scissors, I reached for a penknife. I found this gave me a lot more freedom to create those really organic, irregular shapes, rather than being limited to more straighter or predictable edges that scissors give you. It just helps the whole background feel more natural and a bit more like a landscape painting rather than a structured pattern. As I began placing the first few pieces, I peel back sections of the adhesive sheet and start building up the background. Here I've already added a couple of blue pieces to the top section, but I quickly realized I was a bit limited in my blue scraps. I wanted that top area to stay quite light and airy with some variation in tone, but I didn't have a huge range of the lighter blues to work with. So for one of those pieces, I adjusted it slightly using sponge daubing with white ink. That little bit of blending just softened the color and helped it sit better with the rest of the sky-like area I was building. It's a simple adjustment, but I felt like it made a difference in keeping that top section feeling light and balanced. From here, I've sped up the process quite a lot. This is running at speed 1000. At this stage, it's just all really about building that background piece by piece. It's about mixing and choosing colors, cutting shapes, and layering everything together as I go. In the mix, you'll see that I do reach for my scissors to try and get some of the shapes right, but I quickly switch back to the penknife because it helped give me more control over those soft organic edges that I wanted for this design. So most of this section is just that same rhythm repeating, cutting, adjusting, placing pieces into the background. Sometimes I'm tucking shapes right in against each other to build up a seamless area, and other times I realize I need to go back in with glue to secure pieces where the layers overlap a little or leave small gaps. There's a lot of small decisions happening in the background here, nothing overly complicated, just responding to what the design needs as it develops. I'm also constantly adjusting color balance as I go, making sure no one area feels too heavy or too flat. And that's really the part of this process I enjoy most. It's intuitive, just building and responding rather than planning everything in advance. Once the background's finished though, I hit that familiar challenge, figuring out what to actually do with it. These kinds of busy, detailed backgrounds are always beautiful and fun to make, but they can be tricky when it comes to turning them into a finished card design. Once the background panel's finished, I move on to trimming it down to size. I start by turning the piece over and using scissors to carefully cut away the excess from the edges. From here, I switch to my paper trimmer. Ideally, I would have used a guillotine for this step, but I don't have one, so the trimmer has to do the job. Because this background has multiple cardstock layers, including small strips and overlapping pieces of cardstock, I need to be really careful with the blade here. There's a risk that it could catch on the layered edges and either lift or slightly shift the pieces. So as I'm trimming, I'm deliberately lifting and lowering the blade in sections, just easing it through rather than forcing one continuous cut. When I bring it closer, you can see one small piece has come loose during the cutting, and I'll just glue that back into place. I was actually inspired by the current Freshly Made Sketches challenge for the first cut of this panel. The sketch had a large white space as the main design area, which I thought would be perfect for showcasing this background. The sketch also has a very small central focal element, which immediately made me think of the Festive Friday challenge and their hot air balloon day theme. And honestly, it felt like such a natural fit. Hot air balloons just seem made for a scene like this. Because this background's quite busy and built from lots of scrap pieces, I've found in previous experiments that it really benefits from having a solid, clear, central image. So for this card, I've gone back to one of my favorite techniques, and that's using white embossing powder over solid cardstock. I've stamped a hot air balloon onto a piece of deep blue. I chose this color quite intentionally because this card is for my dad, and I wanted to bring in some of those more grounded masculine tones that still sit nicely with that background. Then I stamped the same balloon again onto a piece of spotted patterned paper. Well, a couple of pieces of spotted patterned paper because I hadn't decided what color story I was going to go with yet. The current Just Add Ink challenge is all about polka dots, and so I thought this would be a really fun way to bring that theme into the focal point itself. Add a little interest to that gorgeous balloon. I cut out 3 versions of the balloon using different scrap papers and fussy cut and layered them to see what kind of design might work. I tried a few different ideas. In the end, I fell in love with the idea of using the blue patterned paper with the white spots as the main top section of the balloon. And then I added a small detail of red bunting across that gave that final little pop of contrast and interest. It was one of those moments where the design really just came together through play and experimentation rather than planning everything up front. So I added the little hot air balloon basket, also heat embossed in white, onto brown cardstock. To help everything sit together against the busy background, I mounted this onto a layer of vellum. From there, I moved on to my sentiment. I chose a Let's Celebrate You sentiment and kept it quite fine and minimal so it wouldn't compete with the background or the focal point. The goal was really just to turn this into a birthday card without overwhelming the design. So here's where it all starts coming together for the final assembly. I'm adhering the finished background panel to a blue card base, which helps frame all of those layered scraps and gives the design a little bit of grounding. Then I add the hot air balloon focal piece onto the vellum layer, positioning it so it sits lightly over the background without fully covering it. The sentiment goes on the same way, kept simple and minimal. I just cut it into these little small rectangles so that it supports the focal point rather than competing with it. At this stage, I actually thought the card was finished, but when I stepped back and looked at it, something just didn't feel quite settled. So I went back to my scrap box and I pulled out a few leftover strips of patterned paper just to see if there was anything there that could bring the design together a little more. In the end, I settled for a tone-on-tone polka dot paper in a bright turquoise blue. It helped lift the blues already present in the background and added just enough contrast to give the focal point a bit more definition. And that really became the finishing touch that pulled it all together. From there, I added a few small epoxy embellishments in soft yellow and light oranges. And that completes the card. In the end, it's one of those projects where a lot of different ideas and challenges came together, but the scrap background really set the tone for everything. If you enjoy this kind of scrap busting card making, I've also created a printable guide as part of my Card Making with Scrap series. It's being shared for free with my email subscribers in June as a little thank you for being part of my community. You can find more information about that in the description below. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time.